Welcome back to the Intuition Incubator. Today I have with me Matthew Ellsworth, who currently serves as the executive director of the Association of Washington Public Hospital Districts in Seattle, Washington, serving 57 districts that provide healthcare needs throughout Washington. Matthew has worked as the government affairs director for an international trade association, senior advisor to U.S. senators, governors, and legislators, as well as managing the campaigns of two current United States senators. Mr. Ellsworth has a degree in politics and international relations from the College of Idaho. He is also a former member of the Idaho State Board of Medicine and currently serves on the executive committee of the Association of Washington's Business and the board of Love Heals Clinics and Kitsap Credit Union. Welcome to the show, Matthew.
Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to have a conversation today.
Yeah, me too. So we met, you were in at a conference that I was speaking at. And then I got a reach out from someone in your organization about potentially speaking at one of your events. And that led to a meeting. And as we were talking, it really struck me how passionate you are, I guess, about your work with the hospitals and how diverse your experiences. Because remember, I was very confused. I was like, wait, how are you at a credit union conference and you work for hospitals, right? So share with our listeners a little bit about your journey and all the different things that you've done.
Yeah, I'm a lucky little kid from a ranching community in Idaho, I always say. And one of those themes I've had in my career is that I get to have a passion for rural America. And I grew up in a town of 150 people and a cattle ranch. And I tell people who watch the show Yellowstone, when you see the white barn and you look at those mountains behind it, my family's ranch is on the other side of that mountain. And they always ask me, is Yellowstone real? And I said, yes, except for you're not rich and we didn't kill anybody. But really it's all born out of just rampant curiosity and wanting to stretch and do something new. And from working in politics to the mining industry to the healthcare industry. And it's kind of neat that you get to meld that curiosity with people that want the help, that say yes and say, come on into our tent and work with us. It's been a great journey. It's fun.
I love that you use the word curiosity, and I'll explain that in a minute. But wow, 150 people, and that just strikes me as so crazy because when we had our first meeting, remember I was bowled over because behind you was the Seattle Seahawks stadium, and I was like, "Oh my God, you're literally like right there. You are
60,000 fans,
60,000 fans, which is like practically half your whole town growing up." So that is a really big difference. But I love that you said that it came out of curiosity. Can you say more about that? What were you curious about growing up?
Well, sure. Growing up in rural Idaho, your friends are your cousins. You don't have very big social circles. And so as my family, we moved to Boise, Idaho, and Idaho Falls and other places. And of course, now I live in a major metropolitan area. Right downtown, no less. You know what? Your only friends being your cousins. God bless them. I love them to death. But you want to expand, and you want to, what would it be like to have a friend who goes skiing?
Oh.
I'd never been skiing. What would it be like to have a friend who went crab potting or on a sailboat? Those are all things I never had access to and never knew existed. And so when that door cracks open through those opportunities, whether it be education, going off to college, could be expanding your own family marriage, or whatever fits, and expanding those circles, you run through them and you say, you know what? I've always wanted to meet you. It kind of sounds like a nerd and a weirdo when you meet them. But like, I've always wanted to meet somebody that went crab potting. And even though I'm probably not going to do it myself, it's that curiosity that expands those. And it also breeds a lack of attention span sometimes. But says, hey, I've always wondered how they got gold out of the ground. And then that turned into, well, hey, people who dig gold out of the ground could sure use somebody that speaks rural language to people who don't live in rural areas, Congress. And and you got to satisfy that curiosity and go and do it.
Wow. That is so interesting. I love the phrase that you said, what would it be like? Because I often talk about that when I'm working with leaders who are feeling very stuck, or if I'm speaking to audiences that are feeling very stuck in the rat race, right? Because we get so bogged down with our environment, with everything that's happening, the stress that's going on. And when we're under stress, we're so narrowly focused. And what happens naturally is curiosity really gets shut off.
Right.
And so, sometimes we'll play this game where it's what if, and it's just this game of opening the mind and asking that very question. It's posing a question, to a very important center of your brain that then begins to get your brain to be able to ask other questions. But this sounds like something that you just naturally, intuitively always asked. Like, what would this be like? So that part of, that part of the center of the brain where curiosity lives, and creativity and community and collaboration, which all have so much to do with every one of your business ventures, was sort of naturally open because you kept asking that question.
It's fun that I used to tell people when I worked for the United States Senators, you're a professional tour taker, because everyone wants to show off to the senator what they do. And so, one day I was touring the dam on a river. The next day I was touring the most Idaho thing ever, a French fry factory. And so you kind of got to pivot a lot. And but the stress of that on the other side comes with having to mentally shift. I'm going to talk about French fries for this hour. Then the next hour, I'm going to talk about water reclamation. And the challenge of all of that I don't think I ever really met was I could never become an expert in any of those things. I had to know just enough through that curiosity and wanting to go and learn about it. And I guess it'll make me good on Jeopardy one of these days. But that pivot, and then as you mentioned to our listeners before, we met at a credit union conference, and I don't have a financial services background. I have a background in governance and leadership, and so they asked me to join their board. And so I did that, not knowing how a credit union runs. But how do I satisfy curiosity when the stress of running an association of 57 public hospital districts, which is an incredibly difficult industry at this moment, it's almost a reprieve. It's a reprieve for me to pivot and go learn and help lead in an area that I don't have a background in. It forces me to shut off that piece of curiosity, I guess, or that piece of that stress in every moment, and it forces me to go do that.
Yeah.
The charitable foundation, Love Heals, that I'm privileged to be a part of, when that pops up on my calendar, I know I have to be focused on that piece and pivot to their needs for that moment. And believe it or not, that this, I don't know how to read into this, but it allows me to shut off the stress of what I was just doing those 10 minutes before.
I know exactly how it allows you to do that, because the best way to get out of stress, literally, hands down, the best way to get out of stress is to go find a way to be of service. When you are of service to someone else, you are now outside yourself. Stress naturally has us focused on ourselves, focused on what am I going to do? How do I look? How will I fix this thing? That's just what the mind does. And when we go and be of service to someone else, you automatically are becoming selfless instead of, self-focused, which is what stress is all about. So that, what a beautiful, it's like you did this naturally. You just literally set up the perfect, setup for yourself to fluidly move through these really pretty challenging areas.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that I'm a person of privilege. I have the ability to say yes to go
Sure.
be part of Love Heals clinics. I have the ability to financially get on an airplane and go work at their clinic in Baltimore. And that's while it took a lot of stress to build some of that privilege in other times in my life, it is worth acknowledging that I can do that. And it's something I take great pleasure in doing, but it's not easy for everybody. And I think there's a space to say, finding micro ways to do that. You don't always have to get on a plane to Baltimore to do that. And thinking back when I had young kids and my wife was she's a physician assistant in PA school, and how do we live through that time? And it turns out it was, we had a swimming pool in the neighborhood across the street. I called it the liquid babysitter. But, not a liquid babysitter, was that pitted turn for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a great point. We can be of service in 1,000 different ways. It doesn't have to be, getting on a plane and doing something. You can be of service just by, being kind to the customer service person, or, just finding the nearest person in the structure that you're in, because somebody's always going through something, and put all of your focus on that person. But I would venture to say that it's part of your curiosity and part of your desire to be of service that, potentially has shifted you out of stress enough times in your life that intuitively you were led to some of these things, that some of these privileges that you now have, beyond obviously the color of our skin and
Sure.
That kind of thing.
My mother always said I was the luckiest kid she ever had, and I think she's right sometimes. I've been presented with some pretty cool opportunities, working in the U.S. Senate and governors, and turns out they don't ask everyday people off the street, hey, you want to go see a nuclear reactor today? And,
Wow.
so luck plays a big piece of it, but you've heard of the red car theory, of how you make your own luck. And I believe in some of that too. But in my career path and as a leader, I think one of those things that's opened up those opportunities for me to pivot and do those other things is, I always say yes to any young person that calls and says, "Hey, I want to talk to you for whatever reason." I remember influential people did that for me when I was young, and send the elevator back down, as they say. And the one they always say, if I could take one thing, what would it be? And I always say, fail fast.
Mm,
And
so good.
maybe riding a bike isn't for you, son.
Right.
And it's not failure to fail fast, but the amount of time, energy, and the stress that it takes to repeatedly fail trying to get it right, which is kind of counterintuitive to those posters you see on your dentist's office wall. But really the ability to say, this is just the wrong path. And it's helped me with, understanding when you have limited resources, either as a company or as a personal individual or even as a family. Okay. And if my daughter's listening, yes, you were terrible at the violin, but we tried. And I could only hear the squeaking so much. And eventually we could say, hey, here's a baseball bat instead.
Right. Yeah. It's so funny because last night at dinner, literally, I was like, I was talking to my 14-year-old and my husband, and I was just like, I would rather you fail a little more, quite honestly. And he was like, well, Mom, I got a 65 on the pre-test at MAF. And I was like, oh, good. I'm happy to hear that, because one of the things, and my older son will say it, one of the things that was hardest for him to overcome is that things came very easily to him. And so, as does with my younger son too. But when you get into real life, and things are challenging, and there's people that you're, quote, competing with for positions or whatever it is that, have spent their lives, playing violin perfectly and being on the lacrosse team and doing this, that, and the other, and all these things that, whatever our society values, and you struggle. When everything has come easily to you, sometimes it's really hard to get back up because you feel like that's a reflection on you. That just means you're too stupid to do this.
I was part of a presentation the other night, and there was in a medical school, and they had a gentleman who was on the admissions committee for the med school. And of course, the room's full of all these pre-med students, and, they're all, here we go. And believe it or not, they all just wanted to talk to that guy. Because of course, he got to score the applications. And one thing he said that I've tried to tell my kids forever, and growing up I got my first political job in high school, dialing for dollars for a candidate, and worked almost every job on a campaign and at different levels. And they're all very driven type A people that are drawn to that line of work. And this guy, what he said really struck me to these students. He said, we can tell when you're just checking boxes to make your list of accomplishments look better.
Oh, yeah.
He said, we know that you joined that club that you don't really care about, that you don't really go to. You just did it because you think it's going to impress me.
Wow.
And how valuable it was to hear those students who are giving up their Thursday night where they could be down at a movie with friends or just sitting on a couch watching stupid TV.
Yeah.
Instead, they were so overdriven to, I got to check this box because it's going to impress some ghost on a committee somewhere. And how refreshing it was to hear that ghost on the committee say, you know what? We'd much rather have somebody who watched the stupid TV show on Thursday night.
Yeah, I love this because it speaks directly to intuition, if you ask me. It speaks to really that inner knowing of when you are in alignment and out of alignment. And maybe you can speak to that. You've had a super diverse, obviously career. And I wonder about if you have moments where, you did reflect and be like, that was not the avenue for me. And I kept trying to push it. Or maybe there's moments where it's like, yeah, no, like this is just, everything is just moving. Like everything just feels totally in alignment. Speak to intuition or what you think that's about.
Yeah, I remember a specific choice where it's naturally, as you mentioned, my undergrad's in politics, not political science, because there's no science to it. Or are we kidding? Sorry, Dr. LaKelsey, for listening. But the natural progression was, you should go to law school.
Okay.
And of one, I didn't have the money for law school. And I sat back and I said, if I went to law school and 3 years later, what would I want to do with that law degree? And turns out it's exactly what I was going to do anyway.
Huh.
And that realization, and quite frankly, what helped, as you would put it, codify that intuition was the fact I didn't have the money for law school. And so that helped make me feel better about the decision. I wasn't as angry about not going. And I ended up, in fact, a lot of folks that work for me and my colleagues through the years have law degrees, and they just have more debt than I have. But that was one of those things I look back on. For those of you that have worked in the political world, this is when a lot of TV now, you could tell I watch those stupid shows up Thursday nights. House of Cards. People ask me, is House of Cards real?
Yeah. That's a good question. Is it real?
And I said, it's absolutely real, except the murders. It's real in the sense of how you interact with people who are elected at that level. And I had the good fortune of working with particularly the two gentlemen in the Senate, very high character, very service-oriented, great individuals. And I wouldn't say that about everybody. I say about these guys. But when you work in that environment, your job every day is to make somebody else look good.
Mm.
And you put all of your capital into no payoff for yourself. When you think about that, that's kind of funny to do for a minute, right? Mm-hmm. It's one thing to do it to say, I'm going to go work at a food kitchen. I don't care about the credit. I'm not going to put it on Instagram. I'm just doing it because it's the right thing to do. Now imagine going to that food kitchen and doing all of that work, but it's your job to have a maximum exposure of credit that will never acknowledge that you exist.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. It's service to one to one ego. And it helps when you are in alignment with how they think. You're not always, and that's okay. It's no different than if you work for Microsoft or
Sure.
Riverside FM studio or anybody. It's that exists in any job you have. But that taught me a lot about how do you be a leader in the second seat.
Yeah. And I have a question about that because it's very interesting because when I'm listening to you talk, I think about that from intuition from another angle as well. I started out my life as a social worker. And before I opened my private practice, I was the backup for the psychiatrist, right? Like we were like this. And My job was gatekeeper and all those things. And I think I shared with you, when we were talking, psychiatrists are not trained in um, mental health. They're trained in medicine. They're really not given any training. And I became best friends with the attending. We were just two peas in a pod. We started on the same day together
Yep.
on a unit. And we had lunch every day together. And she was very open to learning about the clinical side of things. And I was very open to learning about medicine and diagnosis and that kind of thing. Um, and at that time in my life, though, it was much like that. It was like everything, I was doing all this stuff behind the scenes. I was even teaching her in some ways as much as she was teaching me. And well, in all ways, as much we was equal teaching. And but I was not the front person. And then there's been other times in my life where, and I got a lot of joy out of that. Like it
Yeah.
was, I loved it,
Yeah.
and so I,
I
I
did
think
too.
there is that time when you just love, really making someone else shine.
Well, their victories become your victories.
Exactly, exactly. And there's been other times in my life just because of who I am and the soul that I am that came down here. And this podcast is one beautiful example of where I've been very out of alignment and not following my intuition and hiding behind being the number two person when really my spirit is like, no, 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 I want to be out there. But my ego is like, no, I'm afraid, and I'm doing this kind of dance. And I think that happens for so many people where we are going against our intuition, someone who really wants to, and their journey is to be out front, but they
Right.
hide
That's a
behind.
great way to say that. That's very reflective. Growing up, and everyone's like, "Oh, Matt, you're going to run for Congress. Oh, Matt, you're going to be that out front person." And locking into a career of being that second person, or that one right behind, fit me very well, because my intuition was to accept their victories as my own.
Mhm.
I did a big initiative for the governor at the time about building some nursing schools. And we were sitting in the side room at the governor's office before the press conference. And he looks at me and he says, he was just called me Ellsworth. He says, "Ellsworth, this is really good work. No, I'm going to go out there and take all the credit." And he did, by the way.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
but, and then it became time to pivot when those opportunities to be behind didn't exist as much anymore. And then it became that natural evolution to get out from behind, I would say. It was really interesting because I also would feel like I was moving the ball in a bigger way, not just the personality of my boss, but when somebody in my community says, "Hey, would you help us build a park?" I got to
Yeah.
find a way to help them build a park, and that's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
And that's neat that you get to be able to do that. And so that shift and I one of the again, this is that pivot when I left being a staffer for the Senate. I've counseled other senior staffers when they leave, they'll call me and say, "Hey, what's it like on the outside?"
Right.
And I say it's really weird because you have this moment of truth of what I think is your intuition you always really believed, and it's painful.
Mm.
And that is that when you walk into a dinner, there's not a place card with your name on it.
Mm.
And you always really knew in the back of your head that people were inviting you to stuff because you worked for that other person. And it was a true manifestation that finally happened. And that's what's made it easier to say, you know what, this came true just like I thought it would. I'm going to walk away and I'm going to go and be that front and stand up front myself.
When you say it was that true manifestation, what do you mean?
I always believed that I felt good, when they opened the door for me out of the Suburban, and I felt it was an ego boost, and I felt like
Yeah.
I was important and they really care about me. But
Yeah.
turns out they only opened that door because of the person I worked for.
Yeah.
And then when I left working for those people, nobody opened the door for me ever again when I walked out of a car. And so it was like, yeah, okay. I knew this was the reality. And
Yeah, it's so interesting. Gosh, There's so much to unpack there. Well, at least the way I think about it, there's a lot to unpack because there's a difference, right? And this is the thing that I always talk about. There's a difference between our ego, right? All the personality parts that like being having the suburban open, and those are just the human parts. It's just,
Sure.
of course we would. Like, there's no shame in that, right? Like, that's just the human experience. And then there's the spirit experiencer. And yeah, if you've listened to any of these episodes, I really run the gamut between like talking to people like you and then talking to people who are literally talking to people in other realms.
Yeah.
So there's a wide broad of what intuition is. But there's that other part that, like you said, that hard moment, that moment of truth where you are really just talking to yourself and you're like, okay, like my ego might have thought that my worth had to do with those doors being open, but that's not really what my worth has to do with.
Right.
I'm now going to step into my worth,
Yeah.
whatever that is.
That's exactly right. And it's a different transition, and it wasn't what I expected. I try to help prepare others for when they do that, and but now I'm left with some cool stories, and people like you want to talk to me. But it was a neat chapter. But now trying to find a way to meld those lessons I learned about, one, servicing an ego, whether it be somebody else's, whether it be mine personally. And I do think servicing an ego is mostly a good thing. The work I do, Love Heals, I'll give a quick plug.
Yeah.
We're a foundation that we do large scale, arena size scale, free dental and vision clinics around the United States. Due to the benefactor of a close personal friend of mine who created this as his vision before he passed.
Wow.
And instead of stroking the ego of some guy who's going to be on CNN, I could just stroke the ego of Love Heals. And that mini exercise I just did in that sentence is me behind again. But I don't know, using my powers for good, I guess. And understanding that an ego isn't just a person, that an ego can be an institution, a thing, and working to bolster that in a way that is of value to that ego itself, but also a value to me because I feel good about doing that. It's been a great leadership journey for me to get there.
Yeah, that is such a great point. And as you were talking, I was just thinking, last night I ran a small group for younger women, and we were talking about the difference between like happiness and joy. And I always think of happiness as, like, okay, the Amazon gift got here. That's exciting. Oh, the dessert looks really good. That makes me happy. But all of those things are so fleeting. But when you are behind an effort like that, like where that you are profoundly making a difference in people's lives and feeding the ego of this organization, which is able to feed, so many people with healthcare services and whatnot, that's joy, right? Like that fills your whole body. That doesn't go away. That's something you can always reflect on, and you're going to be filled with joy. And the more we cultivate that experience instead of the fleeting, I think the better world that we have if everybody would do that.
Well, I like the bifurcation of those two terms. And joy is lasting too.
Yeah.
If you use the term fleeting, but filling your bucket with little pieces of happiness is a 24-hour cycle. And quite frankly, it's exhausting.
Yes.
I've been taught to, and I try to practice, I don't manage time, I manage energy. And because both are finite, but one has a bigger return.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and I think that probably is what makes you one of the huge things that makes you such a wonderful influence and a great leader, particularly of what you're doing now with the hospitals. Because energy, boy, you and I had a conversation about that, about, how difficult it is. And energy is, it's an exhaustible resource. And so a lot of the work that I do with positive intelligence and with heart math is specifically about fueling yourself with energy. And the kinds of works that you're naturally drawn to, like volunteering with those folks, and being coveted or whatever, and filling yourself with that lasting feeling of joy, and like filling your heart, like that is how we replace energy that gets sucked out of us from stress and worry and fear and all of those things.
Okay. But folks are pretty eager to drill that energy out of you. But
Yeah.
but you can allocate it. You really can. And I can allocate. I chose to put the energy into this conversation today, and it's not just the time on the clock that we're spending. It's making a choice to spend the energy of getting to know you before, the energy of being in your audience, and so. Which, by the way, brings me joy and happiness, I should tell you. But
Right?
it's finite. It is finite, and so and some days you just don't want to expend any of it, and that's okay too. But I think about those things that cause me stress as a leader, and those things that cause me stress are those things that I want to attack and solve, either from a personal or professional level, that I don't possess the energy to solve. And so how do I create more energy to solve that? Now, again, maybe I have to fail fast and say, I can't solve it. I got to preserve some of the battery to go do something else.
Yeah.
It's all part of that decision matrix that runs through our minds every 30 seconds.
Well, yeah. And when you make the decision to go do something else that brings you joy, that turns on the part of the brain that is just more creative and more curious. And then that's when the answers sort of drop in. When we get stuck on like, how do I fix this problem? How do I fix this problem? How do I fix this problem? Like it never works. Like it's the mind is not meant, that thinking part of the mind is not meant to solve problems. It's really meant to recall memory of old things that happened and old solutions. But if you've got a new problem, you need something new. You need new information to come in. So
in the hospital world, and most of the hospitals that I work with are very rural hospitals. We're talking 5-bed hospitals.
oh wow.
And a cash strap, they operate usually with under 45 days cash on hand. And they are the most critical source of healthcare in their communities. I mean, my mother drove 45 minutes to give birth 4 times. And, and that was back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
But when I talk to my hospital CEOs and leaders around the state of Washington, they can deal with 30 days cash on hand. They can deal with the financial matrix that got them into that position. What they want first and foremost as a leader is, how can I sustain myself as a leader and be of value here beyond this year? How can I come back and still be a leader of this hospital when the day comes when we have 300 days cash on hand? How can I be there for that next step? How can I be reflective to my frontline nurses, medical assistants, phlebotomists, accountants, cafeteria workers? How can I be reflective of positivity and joy to them in an arena that's incredibly difficult? And that's what they're asking from, not necessarily, I wouldn't say necessarily from me, but as a whole, as a group. And that's the area they want to grow and they want to be a part of. And when you and I first met, this was a lot of the crux of your presentation.
Yeah.
Your presentation was to people who run credit unions.
Right.
However, the parallels there, and that's why I was attracted to our conversations, is because this really is the top of the iceberg when it comes to challenges for a lot of our rural healthcare leaders.
Yeah. I mean, and the topic just cuts through everything. I was having a conversation with a colleague today, and, we were talking about, there's a lot of programs that are out there for leaders, but if you can't fix the operating system, if you can't manage that stress in your brain and body, then it doesn't really matter the communication skills that you learned, because you won't be able to recall them in that moment. It's really about being able to, understand and manage yourself in those moments and fuel your own energy. But I love what you said about, and that goes across all industries, right? And that's why I love speaking at conferences because people really need to hear that. Um, but I love what you said about like what your leaders are asking for, because, and this I think is really important for listeners to hear. You know, yesterday I was, or the other day, I have a client who's a teacher, and she has been doing a lot of work with me over the last couple of years. And she was telling me she was talking to this student. Um, and I can't remember what the conversation was, but it was something like he said, well, no, I'm just going to make enough money and then I'll be able to buy something that makes me happy. And she was like, like after like, because she came to me in stress, and I've got to do this and I've got to achieve that and I've got to all these things. And then through the process of work has realized like, no, wait a minute, that's just a stress response. And she kind of pushed back on this kid. He was, he's like a senior or whatever. And he couldn't really get out of it because that's really how our education system is built. I mean, that's what we are taught. And that is not what sustains energy, right? So like when you're saying about that, there's so many people that when we're under stress, we're not thinking, how do I sustain this so that I can show up this way for my staff or whatever. When we get under stress naturally as humans, it's how can I sustain this so I don't look like a fool and get fired? How do I, right? And those types of motivations are not lasting. It's the lowest form of motivation.
Well, and again, you're the trained professional in this area, not me, but I think we spend a lot of our energy and our vision of what happiness and joy is based on solving our parents' problems.
Mm.
And my parents were poor. And so the solution was to make money.
Right.
And if mom and dad just had more money, then we could have had more happy vacations, right? There's an example. If mom and dad had more money, they would have bought me a car, right, when I was a kid. And I think that's the natural progression go-to place for a lot of those things. And but the reality is your parents won't always be here. And next thing you know, at least in my case, I was a parent. I was 24 and a new dad, and
oh wow,
and did not have the money. So,
yeah.
But and so it's trying to ground yourself in what really is that metric that, or do you even need a metric to what that joy is? And that's why joy can also be incremental. There's no magic bullet. Yes, when you find some wealth, does it buy you happiness? No, but it certainly lowers some stress.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But again, that's managing the energy side of it. And if you make 10% more than you did the year before, that's probably not going to solve any of the problems.
Right. And it's also like I always talk about solving problems from the inside out. We think if I make more money, then I'll feel better. But no, it's actually when you feel better, you'll make more money naturally. And I love how you talk about it as a metric of finding the place of joy, because I feel like that is where you are intuitively plugged in. When you are in joy yourself, you are in communion with what you are meant to be doing. You are intuitively doing what you're supposed to be doing. And I don't know if you've ever had an experience, it sounds like maybe you haven't. God, I've had a ton, where I am literally resisting something, that maybe everything is pointing toward this is what you should be doing. And I'm resisting it because I've got ideas about what it would mean, or I don't want to do that. Everybody's doing it, or da-da-da, or whatever.
Yeah. You're afraid of jumping off into it, or,
yeah. Have you had that experience where you are resisting something that sort of continues to present itself to you like, no, Matt, this is what you are here for?
Well, and I think the resistance, yes. And I think that resistance comes from the risk, the fear of the risk, right?
Yeah.
I decided to leave working for the Senate, which quite frankly was my identity since I had left college. And my identity was built around, servicing these ids. And I decided to leave that, not knowing I'd face that popularity cliff, I'll call it that, when I left. But I knew for a while that this probably wasn't the long-term place for me. Um, but I was hanging on to it, one, for security, financial.
Yep.
I was hanging on to it for ego. Again, somebody opened the door for me. And out of loyalty, because I truly did felt that I was part and parcel of building this product, of which there's only 100 in the world of.
Yeah.
And that was all pretty cool. But then I finally did let go, and I moved to the other end of the state to an industry I wasn't particularly well versed in, the mining industry at this point. And I had 2 young kids, and my wife had just graduated PA school without a job. and we did it. And it felt so risky.
Yeah.
And it felt, I almost felt guilty that I wasn't fear-ridden about it. I felt that I should have been.
Why?
Because I'm giving up all those things I just said. I'm taking a pay cut. My wife doesn't work. Wait, what am I going to do here?
Yeah.
But we went for it. And ultimately, I think created some of the happiest years we had, because we patchworked it and we made it work. And she eventually got a great job. My kids ended up in better schools. I ended up in a career path that I found joy again in. And so I was able to let go of the cachet, quote unquote, that comes in with being a senior staffer for an important person. And it was almost a crucible moment.
Yeah.
And where I was also couched in fear that, or I thought it would be, that I got to go back. People ask me all the time, do you miss it? Do you want to go back to Washington? Do you want to do that again?
I think I asked you that.
Yeah. And I really don't, because that crucial moment was cemented enough that I did what I knew I should have done, as you put it, in intuition. But looking back, I probably waited too long, but I certainly could have waited longer.
Yeah. No, I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking that is exactly right. Like when we make intuitive decisions, we don't really ever look back. We don't, even though and we're able to, there's something inside that just says it overrides the fear, right? Like when we're just stuck in fear. And I love that you talked about the loyalty, because I think that's a huge thing. Like so many people will stay in a situation, whether it's a leadership position or a marriage for that matter, because they feel that or friendship or whatever, because they feel that they're selfish if they don't, or other people need them, and helping people understand that, like, when you are on fire for what you're doing, when you are true to yourself, everything is in unison. Right? Like everything is operating as it should. And for that matter, like staying somewhere because you feel guilty, that someone else is going to suffer or whatever.
I would say that it's magical when regret becomes nostalgia.
Mm.
And I was afraid of regret.
Yeah.
That, oh no, the senator is not going to talk to me anymore.
Right.
But then the second piece of that, to the loyalty, is that, yeah, I got a ton of nostalgia for the work I did. It was so cool. It was so much fun, which is when I talk like, I'd be like, well, you must miss it. You want to go back, but no. But also it is hyper inflated in the political world, but loyalty is transactional. And particularly in the political world, loyalty is a commodity. And it is a commodity that is meant to be traded and exchanged. And to the point of almost destruction. It's not a healthy commodity exchange.
Interesting.
But then when I view loyalty in the organizations I work in now, I view it not as a commodity, but I also view it as something that needs tended to. And I've been that loyal person, but also when you're a person that is beholden in a loyal way to a thing or a person or an object, if you are that loyalist and you're not being tended to and someone's not asking for you to give a little bit of it, and they don't do that on a regular basis, the loyalty is lost and you're neglected. And you give up on it. It's got to be tended to. And you almost feel when you're the loyalist, I certainly did. I felt a deep sense of rejection if I wasn't asked to invoke it or act upon it. You're loyal to me. I need you to do this. If I wasn't asked to do something out of loyalty, that was rejected.
Yeah.
That was, well, wait a minute, I gave this to you. You should use it. You should use it. You should use it.
Yeah.
And so shifting that paradigm, and again, the intuition is, I think that's in the human nature to say, it's like when you offer somebody advice and they don't take it.
Yeah, right. And you take that as a personal assault.
That's exactly right. Now imagine filling a bucket up of tasks, of things to do that you're willing to do for somebody else that nobody asked.
Yes. And it's so transactional, right? It's not a heart to heart, type of, it's like you said, it's a commodity, it's transactional. And that's really how I think we know when we are not plugged in, and our ego is basically getting hurt because of this, that, or the other, but that has nothing to do with humanity, And now you're in this business that is so much more, these small towns and these small hospitals that's in so much more alignment with that. And even in the stress, it sounds like the leaders there are able to hold on to that part that is just that knowing that no, this, I'm behind this effort. Like this brings me joy and I'm doing something that's meaningful to me.
Yeah. And I do think that our rural healthcare leaders, they do have a social contract. I'll say, I like moving from a way to loyalty to a social contract that says, I'm going to provide healthcare in your community. I'm going to bring in the best doctors and staff that I can find that I can get. But the social contract is that you have to support us as a community, maybe with your tax dollars. You have to give us some grace when I can't bring in the top surgeon in the nation to come and work in our community of 5,000 people.
Right.
And part of that contract is that when you do need a family care doctor to do your annual wellness exam, that you come to us, that you don't drive to the city to do it. And those social contracts require not only a commitment, but they require attending to.
Yeah.
On both signers of that contract. And I found the really good leaders understand that concept. And they don't just go to run a hospital, they go to run a hospital that is quite frankly dependent on the community and not the other way around.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. So, well, you have just a wealth of natural information on this topic.
I don't know.
What would you like to say to our listeners? I think we talked about intuition, we talked about fear, we talked about resistance, we talked about, so many things. What was there one tip that you got as a leader that helped you the most, or what is it that you really would want someone, if you could just say one thing that everybody should know this, what is it?
One of my friends I know will listen to this. She's going to chuckle when I say it, but live your life through the windshield and not the rear of your mirror. You drive through the windshield, and yes, there's nostalgia behind you. Kids, we just left Wally World. Wasn't that great? But you got to drive the car to the next place you're going, and that forward-looking vision through the windshield has helped me and the people have mentored me and people I've mentored be able to accept that, have a place in your heart for what you did right. Nostalgia isn't always happy and joyful. Again, I don't like to say regret, but it allows you to park it where it happened and then move forward to that next thing, because that energy is finite. And so when you look through that windshield and you tear that rear view mirror off and throw it away, that's created a tremendous amount of positivity and joy for me. And it's also created spaces for me to be curious and to pivot and go do things that I never thought I'd be on a credit union board. I never thought I would live in a big city. This is the first time I've ever lived in a city. And turns out I absolutely love it. So, but those are the windshield moments.
Oh, amazing. That's amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I think this is going to be a really, really valuable episode for listeners. And I want to remind listeners that very early on in this conversation, you said if anybody ever asked you for leadership advice, young people can come to you and you would say yes. And I think that would be a great move.
I tell the story of I was a young person interested in politics and even in high school. And there was a very large business association and their CEO came and spoke to my youth government class or whatever. And I walked up to him afterwards and I asked him if he'd had lunch with me.
Wow.
And he said yes. And so I skipped school to go have lunch with him. And turns out he was a newspaper reporter when my grandfather was in the legislature.
Oh my gosh.
And at first I thought that's why he said yes, but no, he said yes because he says yes to everybody. And that lunch alone put me on a path and a track to do so many things in the political world that gave me an interest and a curiosity to go and do. And I've had a lot of students call and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this. How do I get involved? How do I become a hospital CEO? And I don't know the answer to that. But I forget who said it once before. It's probably some business guy smarter than me, but it's the concept to send the elevator back down.
Yeah.
And I really, because people did it for me, and I enjoy the heck out of it because I get to see what the next generation of leaders are thinking about, talking about, why AI matters to them, why old school beliefs I have don't matter anymore, how they feel about a 4-day work week and not a 5-day work week. And it makes me more dynamic with my staff and as leader at the end of the day too.
And there's that curiosity again, right? Like people get really stuck into certainty and certainty it shuts curiosity right down. There's nothing new that comes out of knowing everything. And I think you make a great point. Like I always say that too. Like I love talking to people. I've never met anybody our age and stage who doesn't love sharing their wisdom or, talking to a younger person and giving somebody a leg up. Nobody. So to be afraid to ask that, and because that's something that people get in fear of, right? Well, I don't want to ask. I don't want to bother them. Yeah. It's a joy. It's a joy, right?
9 times out of 10, they'll get a yes.
Yeah.
My daughter is finishing her undergraduate and probably headed to law school. And so she says, well, I'm doing class online. I think I should go work at a law firm and get some experience. So she picked up the phone, she called a law firm, and guess what? She's working there.
Yeah, like, just try it.
Self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess. So, manifest destiny. All these catchphrases. That's what we say.
Right. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our time together, and I enjoy the conversations that you share with the world, and appreciate that you continue to do it.